Hello, my friends. So, what do you think is the biggest issue that we face as a collective human family? Is it a virus? No. Is it inflation? No. That is unfortunate, but no, it's not. Is it a tyrannical one world government that employs a one world police military to keep in line a population that is biologically connected to AI and thus enslaved to the tyrants? No, it's actually not that either, although that's definitely up there. No, it's none of those things, okay? So what I'm going to tell you in this video, you may not be aware of. But to do this, first we have to understand some context. So before we get into it, please take a second to like the video, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, share the video with your friends and colleagues, yes? And as you watch the video, be thinking of a response that you're going to leave in the comments, yes? So let's get into it. Here's the context. Let us say, for all of human history, up until very recently, humans lived in a very localized way, meaning that we existed primarily in tribes and clans, 20, 50, 100 people, we'll say. So let us say that you have your clan and you have found a plot of land and you are living together. There's plenty of building materials for your homes. There's wood and there's earth and there's plenty of wood to heat your homes. And you're situated on a nice little creek, okay? So your shelter, your heat, your water, it's all taken care of. Now, what is the very next thing that you are going to have to procure every single day for the rest of your life? That's right, it's food. The answer is food. Food is the one thing that if you do not procure this for enough days in a row, or some weeks or a couple of months, then the whole clan dies, okay? It is food that dictates the size that the clan can get. And we have seen this all throughout history. Now, let us look at the natural world. Let us use, for this example purposes, a pond. Let us say that there is a pond that has never had any predatory fish in it. It is just a pond that has had nothing but guppies, little minnows. And they've just proliferated and reproduced because they eat vegetarian. They eat like sea moss and plants, which are virtually unlimited. So we have this pond that is packed full of little guppy fish and no predator fish. Now let us suppose that by whatever means, a handful of predator fish became thrown into the pond, a bass. And now, at first, the population of bass, predator fish, would explode. It would explode because there is such a rich and untapped food supply that it would be able to sustain as many bass as it could produce. Then the pond could sustain, the environment could sustain because there's that much food available. Now, eventually, with enough time, there would be one of 2 points reached. The first point would be equilibrium, and this is the preferred one. This is where the population of predator fish would expand just to the point that it kept the population of feeder fish in check. So the population of the two would keep each other in check, meaning that there couldn't be too many bass because there isn't enough, the reproduction rate of the guppies is too slow to sustain more bass. So this we would call an equilibrium, and we see this a lot in the environment, okay? These are the species that we see now. But however, there could be a second option, and this is actually, historically speaking, way more common, is this option, that the predator fish become so large of population that the pond loses its ability to sustain them because they eat so many of the of the guppy fish that the guppies can't regenerate themselves fast enough. And so there will come a time when the bass have eaten every single guppy in the entire pond. They've eaten every morsel of food in the pond, and at that point, when that point is reached, the whole population of bass die. All life in the pond dies. Okay? Now, of course, life itself would colonize the pond in whatever various ways, but that would take a long time, and it wouldn't be bass and guppies right away. So, now let us understand that the same principle applies to human society, because remember, we are of the animal kingdom. We did not come from and are now separate from animal kingdom. This is the animal kingdom. Okay? This is nature. We are of and in and of nature. So, if we look back throughout human history, there has been this system of checks and balances. The civilizations we had could not grow beyond the capacity of the environment to sustain them, like the pond example. So if you look back and you see throughout human history, you will see the cities were kept in check by their ability to produce food on the surrounding land. Yes? That even the ancient city of Babylon, and you can look all these stuffs up, the ancient city of Babylon, we think, it was the ancient megalopolis, but at its height, it only had 200,000 people. Okay? So the cities were kept in balance based upon the ability of the surrounding land to feed them, and based upon how far away they could transport things to feed them. It all has to do with food. Now, so this was true for hundreds of thousands of years, but now what happened just 200 years ago? Humankind discovered a source of stored solar energy from an ancient geological time period. And we have tapped into that in the form of coal and oil. And we have built an entire civilization upon it. To the point that without the coal, the oil, civilization as we know it cannot exist. Now, what do I mean by that? All life on this planet comes from the sun. All life that in the form that we know it, gets its sustenance from the sun. Everything is solar powered. Now, some of you people will say, oh no, well, what about the cave-dwelling salamander that is albino and doesn't need sunlight? Yeah, even that. Okay, anything that consumes anything is consuming solar energy. All life on this planet comes from the sun. Now, we have tapped into stored solar energy. It is all from the sun. The form of carbon that is stored within the skeleton and remains of these ancient creatures. And it's produced a very concentrated source of energy. Now, what has this concentrated solar energy allowed us to do? Well, now that we have the context, let us bring it to the present situation. Petroleum-based chemicals, which is what ag chemicals are, and I am surrounded, I live in northern Indiana right now, and I am surrounded by industrial agriculture, okay? So, petroleum-based fertilizers have enabled us to artificially force the land to yield more than it ever would otherwise be capable of yielding. So it has allowed us to explode in population, because now, all of a sudden, we are no longer constrained by the limits of the old environment, because we have tapped into this source of massively concentrated stored solar energy. And this has allowed our population to absolutely explode. But this has also come at a devastating cost. I will explain. Now, I do not normally do this in these videos, but look at this graph, okay? You see here, this is from worldometers.info, so you can check it out yourself, check out their sources if you like. But you see this blue line is human population, and it remained relatively unchanged, until we tapped in to the oil. Once we did that, it allowed us to grow, to force the land to grow more food than it should be capable of growing. And this is when you see, about the year 1800, the upward, just rocket ship spike of world population. How it goes directly straight upwards. Now, let me just read you this. At the dawn of agriculture, about 8000 BC, the population of the world was approximately 5 million. Over the 8,000 year period up to 1 AD, it grew to 200 million. So it took 8,000 years to go from 5 million to 200 million. A tremendous change occurred with the Industrial Revolution. Whereas it had taken all of human history until around the year 1800 for world population to reach 1 billion, the second billion was achieved in only 130 years, the third billion in 30 years, the fourth billion in 15 years, and the fifth billion in only 13 years. It goes on to say, during the 20th century alone, the population in the world has grown from 1.6 to 6 billion. In 1970, there were roughly half as many people in the world as there are now. Think of that. When people try to tell you about, oh, back in my day, in 1970, there was half the amount of people. Now, why am I reading this to you? Because I want you to understand the predicament that we are in. Just like the pond example, when the predator fish, when the bass reach a point of no return, when there is suddenly more hungry mouths than there is food, and more hungry mouths than there is ability of the pond to reproduce food at a fast enough pace to sustain them. So there's mass starvation. But by the time they realize this, the bass, it's already too late. They've already consumed all the food. And so it's inevitable collapse in the pond example. And let me illustrate to you, okay? So without getting too deep into the biology of it, which I can do if we would like to do this someday, but you don't need to know the specifics to understand the system. So think of it this way. Soil is alive. Soil is not dead, contrary to popular belief. It is filled, it is teeming with life. Just one pinch of compost has billions of microorganisms in it. So soil is a combination of sand, silt, and clay mixed with organic matter and microbes. There has to be microbes to call it soil. Now, these microbes form a very unique and delicate symbiotic relationship with the plants. So, a plant cannot directly absorb the nutrients that are in the ground. It has to, so let's say calcium, for example. The plant roots do not directly absorb calcium. The calcium that is in the earth, in the mineral deposits, has to be consumed first by microorganisms. And then what they excrete, that is in a form that can be used by the plant. So without the microorganisms, the plant cannot survive because it cannot mine the nutrients itself. And it's so beautiful because the plant has such a divine perfection level of intelligence within it that it knows exactly what microorganisms produce the exact type of nutrients that it needs. And so what does it do? It takes sunlight, the plant captures sunlight, converts it to sugars called exudates, and then pumps those sugars in through its roots into the ground to attract the specific type of microorganism that it knows will give it the specific nutrient that it needs to survive. It's just incredibly, magnificently perfect on every level. So I could go on and on about the soil and life, just life in general. But for this purpose, so without the microorganisms, the plant dies, all right? And without the plant capturing the sunlight and feeding the community of microorganisms, without the plant doing that, the microorganisms die because they have no food. That's what they eat, is the sugars that the roots, that's one thing they eat, is the sugars that the root produces. So how is this impacted by the chemical petroleum fertilizers? The petroleum chemicals have been developed in a laboratory, and they have been developed artificially by man, and they are in a laboratory chemical form that bypasses that whole natural cycle of being consumed by the microorganism and then excreted, yada yada. Chemical fertilizers bypass all of that, and it's already in a form, totally artificial form, that the plant can absorb. And so the plant absorbs this, and it absorbs it crazy, and this is why we see just lush, too unnaturally lush growth on so many things, and so many diseases come from this, because everything's thrown out of balance at this point. But anyways, so the plant, because it has the chemical fertilizer in the form that already in the form it needs, it doesn't produce those exudates, those root sugars. It doesn't capture the sunlight and then feed the microorganisms. And so the microorganisms die. Very quickly they die when they have no food. And so this is how we end up with dead soil. Year after year of pulling things out of the soil, minerals, vitamins, nutrients out of the soil, and never putting them back in the proper forms. We think that by dousing everything in chemical fertilizers that we're putting back, well, the plants grow. Yeah, but we are killing the soil because the soil is very much alive. So people say, well, yeah, well, then why don't we just keep using the chemical fertilizers? Well, because it doesn't work that way. The chemical fertilizers don't provide everything that the plants need. And so that is why you have to use more and more. And you can ask any of remember, I'm in northern Indiana, surrounded by industrial agriculture. Ask any of these farmers, and you will see that they have to use more and more chemicals to produce the same results. And they're having to use more and more harder concentrations to produce the same results because the soil is dying and in many places dead. If you go out to a farm field and you take some shovel loads of it and try to grow something in it, it will not grow. Nothing can grow in these fields. They're dead. They're devoid of the natural cycle of life, the natural soil food web. Put on top of that heavy machinery where they compact the soil. Think of how much a combine weighs. And it's going over, that's why they have to till the land, because the soil becomes so compact. It squeezes every little bit of air out of there. Soil, good, healthy soil is 25% air. And it's made by microorganisms, worms, and roots go in there and spread apart the soil and provide a fluffy air type environment for the roots. And this is healthy soil. But when you drive heavy machinery over it and till up the land and everything, it totally destroys. It's like a cyclone for the soil life. And so here we are. We are going to approach, we're already there. We're going to see it more and more in the coming years where the soil is going to stop producing. It's going to stop yielding. And our population is continuing to just grow and grow and grow. And we continue to just waste and waste and waste. I've seen figures that say 40% of food in America is thrown away. That is atrocious. That is so symbolic of our times. Now, I hope that you understand how important this is. If I need to re-illustrate it in certain ways, I can, but when the soil dies, we all die. There's no other way around it. Anyone who thinks that this is ridiculous, and that no, it's not, has nothing to do with overpopulation or nothing to do with soil life or any of that, that's because their head is filled with phantasmal ideas of unlimited growth. Some phantasmal concept of unlimited expansion. That's not the way this pond works, my friends. Share your thoughts. All right. If you're new to the channel, I'm doing 2 videos a week. One of them is this type of video about all different kinds of things. Another one is a traveling narrative where I illustrate lessons and things that I have learned over 10 years of traveling the world. So glad to have you here.